This is video 10 of the MBTI series, and today we are talking about ENTP, also known as the debater. And just like every video in this series, I want to start with the same reminder. A personality type does not tell you whether someone is a good or bad person. How people actually behave depends on their stress levels, their mental health, who they are dealing with, their life experiences, and so many other things. The type is a starting point for understanding, not a complete picture of who someone is. Now, let me tell you about ENTP. The letters break down like this. The E is for extroversion. The N is for intuition. The T is for thinking. And the P is for perceiving. So this is an extroverted, intuitive, thinking, perceiving type. And as an INFJ, I share the N with this type. Both of us are intuitive, meaning we think in patterns, connections, and possibilities rather than just the concrete facts in front of us. But everything else about how we operate is pretty different, and those differences create some genuinely interesting friction when these two types interact. So, what does the debater name actually mean? It fits because these are people who genuinely love to argue. Not argue in an angry, destructive way, but argue in the sense of exploring ideas from every possible angle, challenging assumptions, poking holes in theories, and seeing how well an idea holds up under pressure. They are not necessarily trying to win. A lot of the time, they are just thinking out loud, and debate is how they think. The back and forth, the challenge, the counterargument, that is their natural mode of processing. They also love playing devil's advocate. Even when they agree with something, they will argue the other side just to see how the conversation develops. This is genuinely fun for them. For people who take positions personally, it can be exhausting and even hurtful. But for someone who understands that the ENTP is not attacking them, but just exploring the idea, the conversation can actually be one of the most stimulating ones you will ever have. Let me talk about their main traits now. The first and most obvious trait is their quick mind. ENTPs think fast. They make connections between ideas rapidly. They jump from one thought to another in ways that are hard to follow if you are not used to them, and they tend to be several steps ahead in a conversation before most people have finished processing the first point. This mental speed is one of the things people find most impressive about this type, and also one of the things that makes them hard to keep up with. The second trait is their love of ideas. Not just any ideas, but big, interesting, unusual ones. They are drawn to concepts that challenge conventional thinking, that flip a perspective, that open up a question most people had not thought to ask. They get genuinely excited about intellectual discovery in a way that is hard to fake and easy to recognize. When they're engaged with an idea they find interesting, the energy they bring to it is unmistakable. The third trait is their charisma. ENTPs are usually fun to be around, at least in short bursts. They are witty, they are quick, they tell good stories, and they have a way of making conversations feel alive. They can walk into almost any social situation and find something to talk about with almost anyone, which is a skill not everyone has. The fourth trait is their openness. They genuinely enjoy being challenged. Bring them a good counterargument, and they will engage with it seriously rather than getting defensive. They are not attached to being right in the way some other thinking types are. They are attached to the best idea winning, and if someone else's idea is better, they can actually appreciate that. What are their real strengths? Their creativity and innovation are probably the biggest ones. ENTPs are natural problem solvers in a very original way. They do not follow the established path because they are always looking for a better one. They question assumptions. They challenge the way things have always been done. And because they connect ideas from completely different areas, they often come up with solutions that nobody else had even considered. Their ability to see multiple sides of an issue is another genuine strength. Because they naturally argue every position, they end up understanding the full landscape of a topic in a way that more rigid thinkers do not. This makes them excellent at strategy, at negotiation, and at understanding how different people are likely to respond to a given situation. Their adaptability is also real. The P in their type means they are comfortable with open-ended situations and last-minute changes in a way that judging types struggle with. They do not need everything figured out in advance. They can improvise, pivot, and find their footing in changing circumstances with surprising ease. And their enthusiasm for learning is something people around them often catch. When an ENTP is genuinely excited about a topic, that excitement is contagious. They share what they find interesting with the kind of energy that makes you want to know more too. Now the weaknesses, because this type has some significant ones. One of the biggest issues is their follow-through. ENTPs are excellent at starting things. The beginning of a project, when everything is new and interesting and full of possibility, is where they thrive. But once something becomes routine, once the novelty is worn off, and what is left is the execution phase, their interest drops quickly. They can leave a trail of half-finished projects behind them, and the people depending on them to follow through can find this genuinely frustrating. Their argumentativeness can also be a real problem. Even when they mean no harm, the constant challenge, the playing devil's advocate, the refusal to just agree even when agreement would be the easier path, can wear people out. Not everyone wants every conversation to be a debate. And an ENTP who does not read that cue ends up alienating people who just wanted to talk, not to be challenged. Their insensitivity to how their words land is another issue. Because they are so focused on the idea and the logic, they sometimes miss the emotional impact of what they are saying. A comment that to them was just intellectual sparring might have genuinely hurt someone who did not sign up for that kind of conversation. And because they are not naturally attuned to emotional feedback, they often do not realize the damage until later, if at all. They can also be scattered in a way that makes it hard for them to build consistent habits, maintain routines, or stay on top of the practical responsibilities of everyday life. Their mind is always pulling toward the next interesting thing, and the mundane but necessary tasks of life can pile up while they are mentally somewhere else entirely. How do they make friends? ENTPs make friends pretty easily, at least on the surface level. They are social, they are interesting, and they are comfortable initiating conversation. They can connect with almost anyone quickly because they are genuinely curious about people and they know how to make an interaction feel engaging. Deeper friendships take longer because this type has a lot of surface-level interactions, but not everyone gets past the witty exterior into something more real. The people who do tend to be those who can match their intellectual energy and who are not put off by their directness and their tendency to argue. They also need friends who give them mental stimulation. Small talk and shallow conversation are genuinely draining for them over time. They need people who will actually talk about something, who have opinions, who are interested in ideas, and who are not easily offended when the conversation gets challenging. How do they maintain relationships? This is where things get harder, because maintaining something over time requires consistency, and consistency is not the ENTP's strongest suit. They can be inconsistent with communication, unpredictable with their time and attention, and sometimes so caught up in whatever has captured their interest that the people in their life feel like they have dropped to a lower priority. In romantic relationships, they need a partner who is independent and secure, someone who has their own life and does not need constant reassurance or attention. They are not the most emotionally available type, and a partner who needs a lot of emotional maintenance will struggle with an ENTP. But a partner who can engage with them intellectually and who does not take their argumentativeness personally will find someone who is genuinely fascinating and surprisingly loyal once they have fully committed. How do they handle difficulties? When things go wrong, ENTPs tend to approach problems intellectually first. They analyze the situation, consider their options, and look for a creative way through. They are not usually the type to spiral emotionally in a crisis. They can stay relatively calm and solution-focused, which is actually a strength in a lot of difficult situations. The issue is when the difficulty is emotional in nature and cannot be solved through clever thinking. When what is needed is sitting with a feeling, acknowledging pain, or being present with someone in a way that does not require fixing anything, the ENTP often struggles. They want to help, but their version of help is usually a solution, not emotional presence. And that is not always what the situation calls for. How do fellow extroverts interact with them? Other extroverts generally find ENTPs stimulating and fun to be around. They match the energy, they keep the conversation moving, and they can handle the debate without taking it personally. Types like ENTJs and ENFPs often connect well because there is enough intellectual common ground to keep things interesting, even when the approaches differ. The friction tends to come with extroverts who are more feeling-oriented and who find the ENTP's constant challenge draining rather than fun. The ESFJ and ESFP types, for example, may find the argumentativeness uncomfortable because they are more oriented toward harmony and positive social experience rather than intellectual sparring. How do introverts interact with them? This really depends on the introvert. Some introverts genuinely love being around ENTPs because they get the intellectual depth they crave without having to do the social heavy lifting. The ENTP will drive the conversation forward, and all the introvert has to do is engage with the ideas. Other introverts find them overwhelming. The speed, the energy, and the challenge can be a lot to process, especially for more sensitive types who need a calmer, more considered conversational pace. Now, from my perspective as an INFJ, and this is just a small additional piece, not the main focus, there are things I genuinely like about this type. Their intellectual curiosity is something I connect with. Because we both share the N, we are both naturally drawn to ideas, patterns, and the bigger picture. A conversation with an ENTP who is engaged can be genuinely one of the most interesting conversations I have had because they bring a breadth of thinking and a willingness to challenge things that I find stimulating. I also appreciate their honesty. They do not sugarcoat things, and even though I am more emotionally tuned in than they are, I would still rather deal with someone who says what they actually think than someone who manages my feelings at the expense of truth. What I find harder is the arguing for its own sake. As an INFJ, I do not always want to debate. Sometimes I want a real conversation, something that goes deeper than intellectual sparring, something that connects on a more personal level. And an ENTP, who is always in debate mode, can make it hard to get there. It can feel like the ideas matter more than the person, and that is something I notice and feel even when I know logically that is not the intention. The inconsistency can also be difficult for me. I am a J type, which means I value follow-through and reliability. An ENTP who starts something enthusiastically and then drifts when the novelty fades is frustrating to deal with, especially in a collaborative context where I am counting on their contribution. What types tend to get along best with ENTPs? Types that are intellectually curious, comfortable with debate, and secure enough not to take the challenge personally tend to work well. INTJs and INTPs often make good matches because the intellectual energy is similar. INFJs can also connect well when both people understand each other's tendencies and are patient with the differences. Types that are very harmony-focused, very sensitive to criticism, or who need consistent emotional warmth in a relationship often find this type the most difficult to navigate. How can ENTPs grow? Learning to read the room is probably the most important thing. Not every conversation is an invitation to debate. Developing the sensitivity to know when someone needs to be heard rather than challenged is a skill that makes every relationship significantly better. Working on follow-through is also essential. The ideas mean nothing if they never get executed. Building the discipline to push through the less interesting phases of a project, or finding reliable ways to stay accountable, is what separates the ENTP who just has a lot of great ideas from the one who actually changes things. And developing more emotional awareness, not as a replacement for their thinking but as an addition to it, allows them to be more effective with people and to build the kinds of relationships that actually last. ENTPs are genuinely some of the most intellectually alive people you will ever meet. They are creative, they are quick, and they can make even the most boring topic feel interesting. The challenge is that living with all of that energy, either as the ENTP or as someone close to one, requires patience, flexibility, and a willingness to be challenged on a pretty regular basis. Before we close, I want to ask you something. If you are an ENTP, what is the one thing people always get wrong about you? Or, if you have someone in your life who is this type, what is the experience actually like? Drop it in comments. I genuinely want to hear what people think about this one. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I am currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers, so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my unfiltered diary of solo living in the Philippines, and your support helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I will see you in the next one.